Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Cycle 2 Review, Cycle 3 Preview. My name is Tim Cusick, and I'm your host tonight. I'll be handing out all the awards. Hey, great to have everybody in and jumping in. We always appreciate, we know finding the right time to do these kind of meetings is always challenging, but to see so many people on the meeting, we appreciate it, and we appreciate you coming. Tonight, we're going to go through, we're going to try to move a little quicker. We've got a couple of new things we're going to play with here. Hopefully we'll get through this and get plenty of time for Q&A so the Q&A doesn't have to go late into the night. As always, you can ask questions as you go. Just put them in the Q&A box. We do ask that we're basically going to do the Cycle 2 review, and then we're going to do the Cycle 3 preview. Kind of segment your questions in each segment. The first thing is Cycle 2 review. We are going to play a little bit with chat and polls. You might have noticed we were testing this with Carrie in the mental performance exercise, and we want to carry it. One of the things we want to be able to do in these webinars is get you more engaged and get feedback as we go in a way that we can make it more poignant, answer questions better, and maybe just make it I don't know, a better experience. So you'll see us opening up some select chat moments and doing some polls. We're going to keep it simple. I think we only have 2 polls and a couple of chat moments, so we'll get into those. All right, kicking off with the Cycle 2 review. So I wish I had a really exciting new Cycle 2 review, but I don't. We're going to go right back to this idea of basic, proper self-evaluation. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, for cycles 3 and 4, we're going to definitely get into the more complex stuff. But when we go back and we think about this idea that exercise, that usually its impact, it takes about 4 to 8 weeks to really begin to make an impact on fitness, with the average human being about 6 weeks. We didn't want to push too far forward into beginning to define and track the fitness response until we were 8 weeks in. And these first 8 weeks, we're really just focusing on the good behaviors and the things that we know that will create that response. That being said, one of the things I found so awesome was how well everyone did on the challenge. I mean, so many people beat their time, exceeded their watts and exceeded their expectations at the end of a cycle, being all fatigued. And that was pretty impressive. So I think fitness is really starting to come, and we're going to see it. So the next 2 cycles, deeper reviews. We're going to get into some WKO stuff. We're going to get into some physiology. Right now, we're going to go back to this idea of just looking at the basics, and we're going to go through pretty much the same measurement, the same simple metrics. And we sent out in the email, the last email that you saw, 1 o'clock reminder, or the 1 hour reminder about an hour ago, a link to the review or the self-evaluation document. We've added one new thing under progression. So consistency and rhythm, we're going to do the same scoring. We're going to go through it pretty quick. We're going to look at your CTL progression, but we're also going to talk about your time and zone progression. And that's really the 4th element of doing this self-evaluation. One of the things I want to say, and we got questions on this last time, don't worry about the fanciness of the document or how you could do this. I would do this typically on the back of a napkin, almost quite literally. It's the exercise that matters. It's you taking 5 minutes to do a little self-evaluation, go through the process of what you did and didn't do, and think about some of the whys behind it. So let's just jump right in and see if we can make some progress. This is the new scorecard. It looks very much like the old scorecard. Please make a copy if you want to score it along here with us. I will not update it. The next 2 cycles, you're going to be expected to do it on your own. You see the new time and zone. TIZ means time and zone. You see the measurement of progression, which we're going to get to. So first and foremost, the bottom of our pyramid, we have this idea of consistency. Very simple process, if you remember it. Count all your workouts. Count. Can somebody put the link in chat, Tina or Namrita, real quick? Just giving time for them to put it in chat. Somebody's going to put it in chat because Matthew is asking, looking for it. Somebody will put the link in chat. There you go. Tina did. Tina wins. So all I want you to do in this review, and again, you could do this like literally, I have you can see on top, it says notes. That's exactly what I'm doing. So count all the number of workouts, count the number you turn green or a little better than green. Look, if you're a little over, we're certainly not going to hold that against you, right? What percentage did you score? Are you above 90% green or a little better than green? Are you 80% or maybe you less than 70? So, yeah, Tina, can you put the link to everyone? You sent the link to hosts and panelists. That's pretty smart. Somebody figured that out. Excellent. So look and see how you scored it, right? Now, let's take a quick little poll. I don't need your exact answer. Just tell me, even off the top of your head, what percentage of workouts did you think you accomplished? And maybe you've done the math real quick or you're counting through it, but what percent did you think you accomplished? You can see the results from the audience. It is anonymous. There is no prize. There is no penalty either. Great. Wow, look at all those 90s. That's absolutely why we're seeing the fitness really coming on and the challenge went so well. Excellent. Look, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get into the second 8 weeks. We're going to start talking about advanced theory and principles and stuff like that. Trust me, consistency is at the core of everything you do. Nothing will work. No great training, no secret solutions, no whatever, if you're not consistent at the core. Excellent. Great work. 89% of you are 90% and above. That rocks. Oop. I should have closed that poll. I'm new with polls. I'm all nervous about running polls. There's no poll on the screen, right, Tina?
You may need to close it. Participants may need to close it from their end as well, but you've ended the poll.
I've ended the poll. Okay, excellent. So everybody close there. You might have to close it out of your screen. Great. All right, pressing on. Time and zone, same way we measured it last time. This really is this idea of we're targeting some percentages. You need to look at your time and zone. You don't have to do this now. Do it right after the session. Go back and look at your time and zone. We don't want to create that. Remember how we called it last time the smiley face, where we have a lot of time in zone 1 and then just declining zones and a little bit of sprinting. We want, and for this one, I should have put it this chart first. We want this nice little, I'm not going to call it the middle finger, but hey, if you see that there, that's all up to you, right? It should look like this. Now, what we've seen move here is you should see a higher percentage of time. So I switched the targets a little bit to represent what percentage of times you should see in zone 1, zone 2. And now, since we've gone to tempo and we've been building tempo time, I added a zone 3. So this one might take you a little more. You have to log into your Training Peaks, go to your dashboard, look at your time and zone, and set the time range for the program. So starting November 27th, 11/28, I think it was the first date, and then through today. And take a look at your percentages and see how you did score that. And again, I'm not too worried about the exact percentage. I mean, you don't want to be off, but the idea is you going through the exercise and looking at this and making sure it's kind of matching up with where you want it to be. So Peter asks, how do we see the poll results? They were on the screen changing for us. They were on for other people. They were right on your screen, Peter. Maybe they weren't on the front. You have to click through your screen. So Matthew, I know you're looking for the spreadsheet. Just look in the email you got reminding you about an hour ago. Sorry, I just don't want to get lost in trying to find the spreadsheet. We'll be all right. So this is what your rhythm should look like. I gave you good percentage targets to generally hit. Take a look. And again, just try to figure out. And if this is off, this is a great place, like consistency, this rhythm, why? Start thinking about like, why am I hitting it? Why am I not hitting it? Type of deal. That will, kind of be the basis of the evaluation. Next one we measure is progression. And remember, you can count this very simply. Go into your calendar, look at your Sunday week 1 of the cycle, 1 compared to 2, 2 compared to 3, and 3 compared to 4. Did your CTL go up? So as an example, and this is how we score this, if you went from a 52 to a 55, that's a CTL change of +3. Once you figure out your CTL changes, you can score that in your document for each week and get an average. It will average up for you. And you could just figure out what you want there. Just give yourself a little score. So at the end of the day, what we're really looking at the spreadsheet so far is consistency. What percentage did you turn green? Joshua, the start of the cycle is 4 weeks ago. What was the starting date? Waiting. I guess I could have put that there. It was the week after last rest week. 12/25/23. Thanks, team. 12/25, Monday, December 25th. Yep. Because remember, we actually took the weird break right after Christmas. So measure that. Sorry. Sorry, between all your questions, maybe chat isn't such a great idea. It's very distracting. And of course, everybody literally is texting me right now about chat. If you're texting me about chat, be in chat. Okay, so back to being focused. Progression. Did you progress? Did your CTL go up each week of the cycle? And if so, what was the average gain? Cycle 2 should have moved a little faster than cycle 1. Because the reality is we went to tempo, you were seeing a little more intensity based in your TSS accumulation. So if you were moving 1 point in cycle 1 or 2 points, you might have went 2 to 3 points here in or more in cycle 2. As we continue to increase intensity, we're going to see an uptick, hopefully, in that gain if you're doing the work. Okay. The new one is time and tempo progression. And this, you're probably going to have to go back and do a little homework. In that homework, all I want you to do is look at your tempo rides. And I just cut a portion of a week here that had 3 tempo, a Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday tempo. And I actually do this with all my clients. I do it in my own training. And each time I do something, if tempo is the focus this time, I'm recording the total number of minutes in tempo. So what I want you to do for each workout is take a quick look at your workout and make a note and put in the total number of tempo. Then I actually do SS, steady state, when I do them all as one. And I put INT when I'm doing them as intervals. And that's my own little note to just remember, wow, did I do one long one or a couple of broken down intervals? And you'll notice here for my steady states, I was 54 minutes. And this isn't me, maybe it is, I don't even know, to be honest with you, but this athlete did 54 minutes on Tuesday, 60 minutes on Saturday for this week. What I want you to do when we start thinking about this idea of progression, and the reason I had 2 yellows on the little triangle diagram is progression has a macro view, like you should be progressing volume and overall training stimuli, and that will help you get more fit, improve your general conditioning, and achieve a lot of results. But if we want to achieve specific results, we need to track specific stimuli. So that specific stimuli that we're tracking here in this cycle was tempo. And what we'd like to know is, did we achieve the progression principle in tempo? Now, it was built into your schedule, and it should have occurred if you would have done the work. So once you get done adding yours up and you make your notes, was your tempo progression negative? Like, did you start out with 30 minutes as your steady state and couldn't do 30 minutes and maybe never got, past 20 minutes in this phase? Or maybe you started with 30 minutes and then next week you did 40 and next week you did 50. That's a progression. If you couldn't do it and you missed workouts and you really weren't progressing your total time each workout, then that's kind of flat. So again, yes, steady state is one steady effort. So if you did 35 minutes of straight tempo, that's 35 minutes SS. If you did 2 times 20, that's 40 minutes INT. And I just like to know if I've got them in steady state or interval format. Because tempo, you can do both, right? By the time you get to like VO2 max intervals and anaerobic capacity intervals, it's usually pretty much interval and it's straight up. But tempo, you kind of tend to see both, so I like to record them. And the idea is, and again, we're not looking for a perfect precision here. What we're looking for is this idea of progression. Were you able to achieve the progression? It might not be perfectly linear. It might not be perfect every step, but did you start the cycle doing 20 minutes of tempo or 30 minutes of tempo and end capable of doing 40? If you did the challenge, you probably ended anywhere from about 44 minutes of tempo to 2 hours. I mean, you were tempo. Most people climbed that challenge in tempo. So in the end of the day, you can simply look at this exercise. And I really, really want to say is that this idea of just going through the exercise, like just doing it on paper, and we tend to overthink things and we get lost in the idea of perfect guidance. I need a perfect spreadsheet. I need an exact scoring system. I need a mathematical equation that feeds my complexity bias. And part of why I put out very simple spreadsheets is to move you back, pull you back from the edge. I've built very complex software, as everybody knows, a lot of you know. I want to take you back from the edge of that complexity bias. And just know that you can look at this idea of our perfect pyramid of training, consistency, rhythm, and progression. And we don't have to score it at a level that's mind-boggling, algorithmic, blow your hair back, even though we can, and we're going to get a little more there in the next 2 cycles. But none of that matters if our fundamentals aren't in place and we don't have a simple way to evaluate. Now, and Ali, yes, all your tempo, from the first moment you started doing tempo to the end, the surge counts in there, add them all up. So now, that being said, understanding your fundamentals, let's do another little experiment. We're going to do a little chat challenge. So I want to see, and just chat it into the chat box. We don't need to be specific. As you've now just thought about this, and you might not have done the summary, you might not have gotten all to the numbers, but what's your biggest challenge, like as you're looking at evaluating this pyramid? What's your biggest area of improvement? What did you see real quickly? Even if you didn't get to do the measurements perfect yet or anything, what's your challenge area? What area immediately jumps out at you as some area of improvement? And just go ahead and put that in the box. Alex says long rides on Zwift. Don't worry about everybody about the stop dates. Shut off your complex brain. Don't look at the details and the exact numbers. Just look at the big picture. I wasn't thinking the questions, the responses would be that diverse. Excellent. Okay, some really great feedback going here. A couple of things I saw consistently going by. Recovery and sleep, recovery and tempo, work interference. I hear you. That work always gets in the way. Longer rides, recovery, sleep, a lot of sleep stuff. That's interesting. We need to think about doing a little toolbox on improving that. Just making a note. We can help. I mean, I don't know if we can help, but we can give a little bit of work and some ideas there. A little too much zone 1. Not exceeding watts. That's okay. We'll get there. High time at higher power zones. Be set. All right. Holding the horses back. I like that. Be patient. Excellent. power control. Wow, what a broad array. Excellent feedback. Great. Our little chats, we do have this, so it helps us improve in the next cycle. Excellent. All right, so now that we've done this, let's take that as you've done some thinking, like what has hurt you here, what was one or two of your big challenges. Think about for a moment 3 things you can do differently in cycle 3 to improve. What's something you can do different? Like what's one change? As a matter of fact, just think one. Let's do it this way. Our second chat challenge of the review. What's one area of change? You can't quit your job. I like that answer, Brian, though. It's smart. What's one area of change? What's one thing that you're like quickly, and I know this is the fast assessment, but you're thinking about it. What's that one thing that you can do differently that will improve your ability to just nail it this time? Go to bed earlier. Namrita and Kathy and I were joking about that before we started because we all go to bed at 8. Wow. You know, it's so funny. There's a very clear pattern coming across, and make sure you're sending your chat to everyone so others can see it. By far, sleep, go to bed early, fueling is very high. Limiting espressos, alcohol limitation, sleep more. Wow, a lot of fueling and sleep. Nimrod, I don't know if you were watching that go by, but working out more in the mornings, that's a good point. It is a little easier for working out in the morning.
I will say I'm glad to see this because while the first responses were pretty varied in what the areas that people needed to work on, long rides, progression rides, time and tempo, recovery, all of that. All of those things are directly linked to how well you can sleep, recover, and fuel. So I'm glad that people are making the connection at least. That's step 1.
Couldn't agree more. And you know what's so funny, everybody? Think about what we're seeing here. It's not necessarily like no one wrote the training plan, right? You had some struggles and there was some work or some high intensity work or some high cadence work. Yeah. And there were some elements. But when we look at what really is some of the barriers we saw with reasonable frequency, but when we look at the known solutions, it's the things around the training that are creating some barriers. And that's so true. And if you remember, we talked about that in the kickoff. Performance is multifaceted. Training is multifaceted. You can't just train and not worry about nutrition, not worry about sleep, not worry about recovery, not worry about strength, not worry about other stuff. But it really is about putting all that together. Maximizing your training performance is sort of like taking good care of yourself. What a novel idea. Like being a healthy, whole athlete really does lead to increased performance. So I tell you, we'll read the notes and we'll look through everything, but we can continue to do some encouragement on improved sleep, nutrition, and a couple of these elements and see if we can improve it. Excellent feedback, everybody. Yeah, eating on the ride, better food choices on the ride. Kathy bought me these canisters, and I have canisters of food out, like these little square Tupperware dealios with like each one has like different kind of fruits in it and some cookies and things like that. So all good. It'll work. Keep eating when you ride. All right, let's press on and start talking. Namrita, I'm giving you slide control. You should have just got a little, if you don't see it, I can work the slides, but I'll give you slide control.
So before I get into previewing cycle 3, I do want to know a couple things, and we'll keep using the chat box while we're already there. What are you most looking forward to for this next upcoming cycle? And you can just put it in the chat box again. More intensity. It's coming. More tempo, more threshold work. The TT challenge. Okay. Yep. Seeing how you recover with more intensity. For all of you who are identifying sleep and better recovery and fueling, it's like we say in our workouts, you have another chance to practice this. So you have this whole cycle to practice it, starting with this week as we get into it. Because if you found that that was a challenge in hitting all your targets from the previous cycle, it's going to not get any better if you don't stay on top of it. So we'll talk more about what's coming. Harder workouts, more challenge, sustained power development, all good stuff. So what are you most concerned about? Type that one in too. And that, again, helps give us some insight so we can coach you better through the cycle. Handling the workload, work, training balance, that's always a challenge. Shifting rides outdoors, okay. Fueling. Making the high zone intervals, okay. So getting sick, yeah, honestly, I mean, as things start to ramp up, definitely staying on top of all the tools we've given you so far. Again, we had it in a podcast too. There's been a couple blog posts recently from Tim and myself on staying healthy, because that's really the most important thing. That's what's going to allow you to stay consistent in the program. You have to stay healthy first. Okay, thanks for all those. I'm going to get started with previewing cycle 3. So here is, let's see, our first objective. We have now tested our functional threshold power twice, and we have another test coming up. But as the workouts are going to progress, we're really going to start seeing that move. So we want to focus mostly on beginning to push your functional threshold power, your FTP, up from below. So what does that mean? We've done a lot of endurance work. We've done a lot of aerobic, zone 2. We've done a lot of tempo, which again is still aerobic. We are now going to progress the tempo into what we call sweet spot or sweet spot tempo. We're getting closer and closer to what your FTP is, to that intensity. What we see, and I'll show you a chart that you've seen before, but what we see with more sweet spot and more sweet spot tempo work is better, richer aerobic adaptations to help improve your aerobic engine. So what does that mean? We're still focusing on that aerobic capacity and your aerobic capability by training in these endurance zones, even in sweet spot. Again, it's still below your lactate threshold too. And so that measurement is actually, your FTP will go up the better your aerobic capabilities are. If you think about what that threshold is, when you go above it, you start to fatigue faster and faster. But then below it, you're still aerobic. And so we want to start moving that threshold up from training below it in our aerobic domains, again, including sweet spot. Our second, continuing the theme from cycle 2. So in cycle 1, we did a lot of higher volume, low intensity. So you see in the zone 1, the green physiological zone, that was the largest proportion of our training. When we shifted to cycle 2, we saw a little bit more in that zone 2 or that tempo zone. We are doing the same thing, and it's a pyramidal training modality. We're going to stay there for cycle 3, where we're still working in that, zone 1, zone 2 domain, but we are now working a little bit closer to the right. If you look at the second, I don't know if you can see my cursor, or Tim, you want to use yours, the second dotted line to the right is your, consider that your FTP or your lactate threshold too. We're going to start riding and doing more work closer to that line. So this you've seen a few times. So where does sweet spot actually fit? Well, again, if you look at 4A on the far right and the Coggan eye levels, it's right below tempo. If you look in the middle of the training target, I like how these are blurred together. So green and yellow are really, there's no distinct line of demarcation there. It kind of blends together, and that's why we're calling it sweet spot tempo. You don't need to be at the top of 4A getting into FTP. Again, the more you try to push that, and we use the term chasing watts, the more you're going to start to get into that threshold domain, which carries more fatigue with it. And I'll show you another chart in a minute. But that's kind of where it fits. So it's very similar work. It's that intensive aerobic work, again, but below threshold. And if there's some days where you're at high tempo and you see green on Zwift, I wouldn't sweat it. Here you're going to have 1 watt either way. You're accomplishing the same general training stimulus for basically the same adaptation. So this is an interesting chart. On the x-axis across the bottom, you see exercise intensity as a percent of FTP. You've got all your zones in the background here, zone 1 through 6. And then this, let's say pyramid line, upside down U, is the training effect. So the training effect being how much can it improve your threshold power or your FTP? So you see at the very top of this peak in this inverted U, we're really at L4, which is that yellow sweet spot. Again, it's pretty high in L3, which we're considering tempo. It is highest at L4, but look what's interesting here. This line that's starting at 100 and coming down, that's volume. So how much time can you spend? You can spend more time in tempo than you can in sweet spot or threshold or anything more intense than that, right? I mean, you can just think about yourself. When you're doing an FTP test, you're getting your 20-minute best power, and then you're calculating your threshold power off of that. You're limited into how long you can ride. Now you're riding an hour of tempo plus probably at this point. So again, you can do a lot more work here and still get almost the same benefit as you would riding in sweet spot. So that's kind of the key. That's why this dotted line this dotted oval is here, because this is really our sweet spot. And this is where we want to focus our work right now. Again, it's right where L3 or tempo and sweet spot meet, sweet spot tempo. Now, the last piece of this is the physiological strain. This kind of looks like your lactate curve would look. So it's going to be low, low, low. As you get into tempo, it's going to start increasing. And as you get to your FTP, this lactate or this physiological strain, lactate would be a proxy for the fatigue or physiological strain that's happening in your body at these intensities. It's going to start going up exponentially. And so we want to minimize. What we are trying to do is give you the most benefit for the least cost. And that is going to be the lowest physiological strain to allow you to ride the highest volume. And that's, again, right here in this sweet spot tempo zone. Tim, did I miss anything on that?
No, I mean, I think well said. Sweet spot really plays that role. That the simplest way to say it, you get 98% of the gain of doing FTP work. So we're really going to start pushing. So far, one of the things, is interesting, and no one's really asked this question. We haven't been building threshold. We're not trying to make even though everybody measures by FTP, and I even saw comments here like waiting for this FTP response. We haven't even started to push FTP. We're just improving your general conditioning, which is a premise or a preface before we push. Here, now we start pushing FTP up from below. And sweet spot is just simply, you get 98% of the gain of FTP work for a lot less fatigue, because what happens once you go over that threshold, and like Namrita said, it's not just 1 watt, you're accumulating lactate. That comes at a much higher cost. There's more micro damage, there, muscular level micro trauma. There's other impacts. So the recovery time takes longer. Sweet spot means we can do more time in sweet spot. We can do more frequency. And actually you're left a little fresher and more focused on adapting to that effort versus just rebuilding muscle and some other impacts, the damage of going over threshold.
Yeah. And so hopefully this visual helps to control that intensity. For those of you who are, antsy to get going in cycle 3 and start riding hard, keep this in mind, because again, the program is progressive. And if you felt tired by the end of cycle 2, you know exactly what's coming, by the end of cycle 3. So just keep that in mind when you see all these sweet spot tempo workouts. This Keigen chart should also look familiar. Last time we highlighted the zone 3 tempo column, and today we're looking specifically at the sweet spot column. You can see it's very much the same, just more, I use the term it's enriched. The adaptations that we're getting, and they're all the same as they are for tempo, as they are on sweet spot. They're just a little bit stronger. Again, because we are getting closer to FTP, we are using a lot, we're stimulating and sending a stronger signal. A lot of the same things, but again, with the higher fatigue cost. So look at the example length. For tempo, you might be riding 1 to 4 hours. At sweet spot, we're starting at a half an hour, all the way up to 3 hours. If you're riding more than 3 hours of sweet spot, you probably want to test your FTP again. So yeah, I mean, I don't have anything really to add, except it's all the same adaptations. Again, it's very aerobic, but we are seeing some more, possibly some increase in your VO2 max, and finally getting more specific to raising your actual lactate threshold. So our next objective would be to build in the force strength domain. And I'll talk about that more in a second. You're going to start seeing some more big gear work. We've done a lot of higher cadence work. We are going to now shift. I know a lot of you will be happy about this, to a little bit more low cadence work sprinkled in, because we want to start to improve more muscular power, that power transfer. It's so simple. And I remember Maya posting this meme last year, and it's something Tim always says is, what are the pros? Like, what's the secret of the pros? And it's literally that they push down on the pedals harder. So remember that. And I'm always going to think of Maya's meme that she made. But that's what we're going to start working on, because if you don't work on it in training with some of this big gear work, and I'll show you in a second why, it's not reasonable to expect that you're going to be able to push or make huge amounts of watts like the pros. So a little poll. Tim, are you ready to pop that up?
I am.
Okay. Let's see it.
We're still experimenting poll. Here we go.
All right, so this one's easy. Which cadence do you prefer? Higher or lower, or both?
Got a lot of fast answers there, huh? It's funny, we should have polled it in the kickoff before the first 8 weeks and polled it again.
I know, because in the feedback we always get at the beginning, in the group rides at least, is people like the lower cadence, but look at that. I guess you've gotten used to the higher cadence.
Victory.
Mm-hmm.
Victory.
Hey, Daniel says there needs to be an it depends. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so a lot of you, about half of you, like both. That's really interesting. Slightly
That's
more.
really what we're going for, isn't it?
Yeah. And slightly higher percentage like higher cadence. So, okay.
Awesome. You might have to close your poll box, everybody, but I closed down the poll.
So let's talk about force kinetics. So everyone knows this by now, but a watt is how hard you pedal or torque multiplied by how fast you pedal, or cadence, or RPM. So if we look at this chart, we've got, oops, see my poll popping back up. RPM across the bottom, so faster cadence as you go across the right, and then higher torque as you go up on the y-axis. So let's focus on, we see here the red line is the highest torque at the lowest RPM. Obviously, as cadence increases, torque is going to decrease. So with max cadence here, you see no torque. That should make sense if you think about it. And then you also see this blue inverted U, which would be power. So max power right here at the very top. Let's focus on this area right here, because most of us are comfortable somewhere in this range, maybe not towards the end of each range here, but we're looking for really developing a nice broad power band. We talk about this all the time and wanting to be comfortable pedaling at a range of cadences to make power, to make those watts. And so if we're really looking here between 75 RPM and 125 RPM, we would like to be able to be pretty decent at making power pretty comfortably within that range of cadences. There we go. So this is another way of looking at what we're going to be doing. So here on the y-axis, we have velocity or higher cadence increasing on the left. So again, when we talked about faster cadence, meaning lower torque, sprinting is up here in this top domain. If we're looking at load or power across the y-axis, this is really where we're going to be focusing on. So cycle 1 and 2, we did a lot of higher cadence work. Cycle 3, we're going to start spending some more time in the lower cadence, bigger gear work. And why is that? So Tim has put here extended climbing below threshold. A lot of us are going to be doing that as we start getting into our events, as we start getting outside to ride. Yeah, we're doing, you know, some of that climbing in Zwift like we did in the Alp Challenge, but one of the key demands of riding your bike outside is exactly in this domain here. And so we want to start to better prepare you for that. We will be spending more time here. This middle section is kind of really both. And so we, Tim has termed this power climbing or above threshold. So it's kind of higher cadence, higher watts, right? You're not going to sustain it for that long, but really here at the bottom is what a lot of us are going to be doing on a fairly regular basis coming out of this program. Anything to add there? I know this is your chart, so I might have missed something that you meant to add, Tim.
No, I mean, you said, well, I mean, you have 3 forces of strength domain. Force, velocity, fast, power, you know, 1 to 3, 4, 5 minute climbs, and then extended force. The point of making extended force, this is a great time of year to be building that force pedaling because you're preparing to go outside. So like in the old Euro training, February is climbing month. Like you do a lot of your spinning earlier. And in February, this was at the time that say build strength. You're not really building strength. You're building better neuromuscular coordination. But the reality is that's what we're doing. You're going to see some solid big gear, like harder big gear work. Now, the big gear work we've been doing so far has been at tempo kind of efforts. Now we're going to do things a little harder and a little more extended in that big gear work. Really try pushing some power. And that really is make you stronger, get you ready for the season, and prepare you to go outside.
Yeah, I see a quick question from Rebecca on what is 85 RPM. That's such a common preferred cadence, and that's where a lot of us will settle in. And even if we have, you know, if we're doing a group ride in Zwift, you might see 85 as the cadence, you know, just when we mean self-selected. So that's, you can see on this chart here, it's right in the middle of that. So it's not surprising that many of us will just naturally fall there. And what we're really trying to do is expand your preferred power band. So maybe you're not always going to be pedaling at 120 or 125 RPM or at 70 RPM, but you should have a improved ability to do so. Because as you fatigue, you want to be able to have those options available. Mm-hmm.
And it's cadence versatility, everybody. That's what you're really building. We got into this discussion a couple times in Facebook in the last 2 weeks. It's the average person between 80 and 90 is self-selected cadence. That's like 85% of the universe on a bike. It's a very high number, will fit within that range, but it's not everybody. But what this is saying is, like, the best the world, they can put out they'll put out their peak power at around 130 RPM, 135, 125. Some other people, everything kind of drops off that. The real key point though is, if you're in an event and you're going uphill and you don't have the right gearing, and then you're going down a long slight downhill and other stuff, you need to make power efficiently here and efficiently here. What happens to a lot of us is we narrow that power band down because we're always generally trying to pedal in the same cadence to a very small level. So while we're doing high and low cadence and force controls and big gears and standing cadence and all this other stuff, we don't want to make you a high cadence pedaler. We're not trying to make you a low cadence pedaler. We're building your ability to produce efficient power across a range of cadences.
And I'll say, if you mostly ride indoors, even after this, you're even more likely to have a narrow power band.
Yeah, and honestly, my findings in Nimrod and I doing this together for 4 years, it gets narrower and it actually gets a little faster. We were talking about it today. So part of why we're doing a heavy cycle of big gear is that then when you have that, you end up on the trainer spinning at 95 all the time or something like that. Then you go outside to the real world again, and that just hits you hard, like right off the bat, because you can't always spin at 95, right? You start climbing again and you're like, so we want to build that cadence versatility. And that's just simply the output of efficient power across a range of cadences.
So let's compare. This is also from the recent toolbox, I believe, when Tim was talking about efficiency versus economy. So this might be a repeat for some of you, but if you haven't seen it yet, lower cadence does actually have greater economy, which means there's less oxygen cost for the effort. Thinking about that, it should make sense because we always talk about shifting the demand of the effort into the legs more, so higher muscular demand, but your heart rate comes down, your breathing rate comes down. There's a lower cardiovascular demand there. The load is in your legs, which means you're going to fatigue faster though. So that's the whole thing where it's a trap, right? It feels good to be in low cadence, but you're going to tire out faster, even though it's more economical. Well, higher cadence is the flip side. It's actually more efficient. So it's not as economical because you're using more oxygen, your heart rate's higher, greater cardiovascular demand, yet it's a little bit more uncomfortable when your heart rate goes up and you can't talk as well. But you're not going to fatigue as fast peripherally in your muscle. There's less muscular demand. And I'm sure all of you have felt that already, but it's just something that another reason why we want to be very comfortable at, seated pedaling, relatively higher cadence. But now you also see why, and if you did the challenge, you also know and could probably feel it, the benefit to mixing in lower cadence here and there.
I think, and I looked at a fair amount of files, there was people this year, much more so than any other year, that used higher cadence early and maintained it for a while. And I think that absolutely was a light bulb for a lot of people in this challenge that we've had a hard time getting across before, and it worked and it improved your time.
Yeah, so when we talk about the FTP test coming up, think about that as well. So if you've gone into the first test or two and relied on that lower cadence early on, you may want to rethink your strategy.
You already did this one, sorry. All right, let's talk some coaching tips here.
Yeah.
So Nimrod and I'll kind of just walk you through some ideas and tips. I don't know who's in control. We've got 4 good tips. We actually have a slide on each, so let's dig into them about just getting ready for cycle 3, some things you can do. Tip number 1, the most important day you can probably edit in this cycle is Wednesday. You have 2 back-to-back recovery days. In these recovery days, it really is, it's super difficult to coach in a group coaching because it's very individualized. Like if we were working one-on-one, I would have been asking you, all last week, how are you feeling? Or you got one more day, where are we at? And we might have chose to start resting on Sunday. Might have been the fatigue was that deep. Maybe we started on Sunday, but okay, you pushed through. Most people pushed through and did the Sunday. So now you have these 2 days of rest. The thing is, on Tuesday, tomorrow, you got to ask yourself at the end of the day, how do I feel? Am I ready to get back at it? If you're really tired still, I'm like, man, my legs are still heavy, it is simply okay to take another rest day. And I answered this question on Facebook, and I actually put it in the one thing somebody asked, but I won't turn it green. What do I do? And I said, delete the workout. Like, if you're worried about the green, delete the workout, you'll be fine. Calendar will look pretty at the end. Because what you don't want to do is compromise the whole cycle because you didn't give yourself that extra rest day that your body was telling you you needed because you wanted to turn something green. It's really important that you listen to that. If you're like, hey, I'm not sure, it's okay to just jump on for 20 minutes even and just feel. Just take it really easy, like under 55% of FTP. Just spin easy. And if 20 minutes in, you're like, I'm feeling better, go to 45. Don't go over an hour and just keep it easy. That's okay too. But if you're like, man, 2 days, I'm recovered better than I thought I would, I'm ready to roll, do the simple primer, open up things, and we'll roll into the week. But we can't make that decision for you. You have to make a good decision for you. Anything to add to that, Namrita?
No, I think it's so, it takes practice, not being just like focused on turning everything green. So I love that tip. Just delete it. I mean, we're thinking big picture here.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work coming up.
Solve your OCD issue in one simple delete.
Exactly.
All right, let me talk about this next one because it's important. And I think this is where we're potentially can get in the most trouble in this cycle. And I lecture my athletes about this all the time. It's a fight. So we're going to do a fair amount of sweet spot training. And sweet spot training, as Namrita laid it out, is an excellent place to get all the benefits of FTP, most of the benefits of FTP without the fatigue. And here's why, because you're just under threshold. When you go over LT2, and it's not a light switch like it was stated, it's not 1 watt. But when you truly go over threshold, what's going to start happening is you're accumulating lactate and other byproducts. You're doing more damage than we want to do. And you're changing the physiological stimuli. Because at that point, your body has to start thinking more and more about dealing with that lactate and byproduct, and a little less about producing the power, the metabolic side. Well, it's part of all of it's metabolic, but you get my point. So what happens in sweet spot, particularly as you're 8-10 weeks into your cycling, you're feeling pretty good. So you just nudge it up 5 watts. And then you just nudge it up 5 more watts. But by the time you've nudged it up 10 watts, you're doing threshold work, or maybe even a little over threshold. Just because you can go harder doesn't mean you should, because that will interfere with our target stimuli. The impulse response model will change because you will shift the impulse to be something different. So what I like to call sweet spot, it's a delicate targeting. Like, all right, if you're doing zone 2 and you go a little harder and then you go a little easier, you got a lot of room to move there. If you go a little too hard in sweet spot, suddenly you are doing threshold, and it's more work than we want to do. You're accumulating. You're accumulating more lactate, more byproduct, more fatigue than we want. Pete asks in chat, is there more than percentage? We're going to talk a lot about the feeling of sweet spot in workouts and through the week. Sweet spot feels sweet. It's a tough thing to find. You often don't realize you've gone too hard till after you've gone too hard. That's the trick. So it kind of you have to calibrate those feelings, because what'll happen, you're doing a 20-minute sweet spot interval, 5 minutes in, you're like, I'm good, I'm ratcheting up, right? And then about 4 minutes to go, you're like, ooh, this might have been too hard, because you're reaching to finish that interval. But we'll coach that more. But listen, everybody, what I'm about to say. It is better to err on the side of reduced watts. I'd much rather have you be a couple of watts under versus, maybe what you should have done or could have done that day versus pushing over the threshold. Because this will be like the dominoes. Remember, we talked about that. If you take 2 sweet spot workouts and turn them into 2 threshold workouts, you're going to get those fatigue dominoes and they're all going to start falling, click, 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 click. And you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have compromise. You're going to start compromising workouts. Things are going to struggle. Don't turn these into threshold workouts. Final tip. We're going to start in this cycle, particularly as we lead into this the challenge, the time trial challenge we have this week. We're going to go beyond the spreadsheet. We use the spreadsheets aggressively in the first 8 weeks because we really want to teach you what good pacing feels like. This idea of being negative split orientated, not starting too hard, learning to feel your way as you ride into power. But once you start getting that, the spreadsheets could be what's holding you back. So in cycle 3, we're going to be coaching you beyond the spreadsheets and into a little more, into feeling the same negative split, feeling the same type of progression, but knowing how to read what's happening. Well, trying to know, making some good guesses, because often learning is going to come from failure. So be ready for that. How to push beyond the spreadsheet, when to do more. What was cool, I thought this was interesting. A couple of people posted about this, even with this, they had like a good and better spreadsheet for the challenge. That's the type of thinking we want. Once we can begin to quantify things, put numbers to the process, put numbers to what we're doing, then we can use that to calibrate feelings. Then we use those calibrated feelings to put out better numbers. That's what the first 8 week was about, calibrating the feelings. Second 8 weeks is now going beyond that and being able to go beyond the spreadsheet. Anything to add there, Namrita?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reinforce, like, a lot of you did better than you thought, especially on the challenge. You had a target and you blew it out of the water. And so hopefully that gives you some confidence. And yes, the pacing calculators are always a great place to start. But again, performance is so much more complicated than that, and it's hard to capture. And your mindset and your your mental fortitude, I guess, and your motivation are huge in that. So don't forget that piece. Also, a lot of you who had your great days on the challenge did emphasize like your fueling and how you got to bed early and you ate, more than you thought you could ever eat in the morning. So remember that when you test this weekend, and you're looking for another personal best with your FTP test, you still need to do all those things. We call those the process goals that go in. So yeah, you might be looking for, whatever X watt increase in your FTP, but you still have to do all the things to get your body in a state to perform.
Excellent. All right, upcoming events in cycle 3. Tina, why don't you rock through these events and then we'll talk about the challenge.
Yeah, so just really quickly, we have some key events coming up over the next few weeks here. Just want to highlight them briefly. You'll see them all in the locker room under calendar, so you can sign up for everything there. We have 2 Basecamp University live biomechanics courses coming up. The first one is on the 25th, so coming up this week. And we're partnering with our fantastic sponsor and partner, MyVeloFit, for that. And so this is super cool. It's a multi-part biomechanics course, and we're going to talk about how biomechanics affects performance and your efficiency and injury prevention and all of this. And we're going to give everyone a 2-week full trial of MyVeloFit, so you can actually do the bike fitting along with us as we talk about biomechanics for those sessions. So a lot more coming on that. Watch your email coming soon in the next day or two here for a for a code for that. And then beyond that, we have an advanced training live class coming up with Tim on the 31st. Keith and Rebecca are back with yoga on Friday, February 2nd. We have another coach panel this cycle. This is going to be on dealing with setbacks. And then, of course, we'll wrap the cycle up with our Challenge 3 time trial challenge on February 17th. And start times will vary on that a little bit. Yeah. It'll be just, we'll share a lot more as we get closer to that, but sort of mark your calendar for that one. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to do it on TT bikes. Everyone's going to be on a TT bike on Zwift. So we'll talk about what that looks like. There's going to be no drafting. It really is going to be you against the course. But we're all going to go out and do it together. It's going to be a shorter, hard effort. So no sort of 4-hour epics here, just 20 to 30 minute, 20 to 35 minutes, somewhere in there. Course,
Yeah.
Undulating course. This is not an uphill TT like the Alp. So keep an eye out for lots more coming on the TT challenge soon and more opportunities to win very cool prizes.
Excellent. And this gives, you remember you're doing that scoring 2-hour where you over 2.0 or under, or were you a climber, not climber? If you were over 2.0, you're going to get a little revenge here. You're going to chalk one up for the 2.5s. All right. Let's do next steps next. So I asked Kathy to come on today. You know, obviously Kathy, I'm sure everybody knows in the background, is always helping you and answering questions and getting you caught up with stuff and training, but she also handles all our coach placement and stuff like that. We've had, starting this week already, a fair amount of questions about what do I do after base camp? How do I work with a coach or something like that? So I asked her to come on and give us a minute too about what you should be doing right now to get that locked in.
Hey everyone, Kathy here. So last year we had a flood of people looking for private coaching. It's an awesome way to go if you want to treat yourself after base camp. You know, private coaching, takes all the stress out of training. You don't have to think about what you're doing anymore because the coach will take care of it for you. So if you're even thinking about it, now's the time to start looking. We have 20 coaches, but everybody has a certain amount of slots and they don't go overfill because we like to keep our athletes special. And so reality is I just put the link into the chat box and I do 30-minute private consults to people that are interested in learning about private coaching. And we can talk about it and tell you the benefits and help figure out how to make it work for you. So get on board. Sign up for one of my Calendly. It's a calendar app that you can sign up for next week, the week after, whatever. The sooner the better, because as we get closer to the end of base camp, we just don't have the spots left. Now, we do have other options and we'll be launching them in the next, in February or so, that there's other training plans. But if it's private coaching, let's get on it now. And I can start talking to each one of you and you can start talking to coaches as well.
Yeah, what happened last year, I'll tell you why we ended up putting this in there, was last year's experience. We had so many people the last week of base camp wanted to hire a coach. It took us 2 or 3 weeks to place everybody. So we want to be ahead of that game this time. If you're interested in it, let us know now so that you can have a smooth transition. A seamless transition is the goal. Last year, we weren't quite as seamless as we really wanted to be because it was just more than we could manage. It was just more meetings and more setups with coaches and stuff like that, all condensed into that final week. So we're really hoping to just have a little better roadmap of getting there so it isn't so frantic at the end of the year. Excellent. Thanks, Kathy.
Sure.
All right, final slide, slightly out of order. We have a favor to ask you. Every year we do a midpoint survey. It really helps us up our game. Getting some of the feedback through chat that you've done here has been very helpful. You have this survey now in your email. It came at 8 o'clock tonight. Check your junk mail if you don't see it in your regular email. That may be why you're not getting our newsletter also. Make sure you always approve our emails so that we get information. If you could complete the survey and give us your thoughts, it only takes like 3 or 4 minutes to complete it, maybe a little longer if you have longer. There's a comment section in the end. It really helps us improve. Now, whenever we ask for feedback and surveys, we'll come back in about 3 weeks, 2 weeks. It depends how fast, like we leave the surveys open till they really stop coming in, and we'll tell you what we learned. We always share the information back and actually the actions we're going to take to improve not only next year's program, but what we can improve in the final 6 weeks of base camp and really make it an enjoyable experience for you. Now, we're going to go to Q&A, and there's a couple of questions I saw building up. So maybe I'll take one. I'll facilitate and we'll just kind of team answer them. Cindy asked, and I should answer this one when we were talking about cadence, so I can tackle this one. Is it natural for your cadence to drop in real life? I'm not 100% sure what that means, Cindy. For me, when I see in real life, I mean, you're not dead when you're on the trainer. That is real life. You're just riding in a virtual world, right? The same habit happens for a lot of people. When you fatigue, you tend to drop cadence, indoors or outdoors. It doesn't matter. It's the same physiological response. Because as you're fatiguing, you are looking for some way. It's you have muscular fatigue, peripheral fatigue. It's a biochemical reality. You're running out of energy, and you're slowing down. Like you're just making less contractions because of that. It's a natural thing. So part of why we do a lot of higher cadence and work early is to build up that cadence and cadence sustainability. And then we keep our always working on the versatility. So it is natural to reduce cadence. Now, your other question maybe is your indoor cadence higher than is your natural indoor cadence higher than your outdoor cadence? I've been studying indoor training for like 5 years now, and it's absolutely my observation. Namrita and I were talking about it earlier today. I see people come into 4 straight months, 16 weeks of training indoors, and their average cadence might be 85, and 16 weeks later, it's 95. It definitively over time seems like, and definitively in a bell curve, not everyone, just being on the trainer and spinning, it just drifts up. And again, the goal is versatility, not a higher cadence. And then what happens is you drift up, and then you go outside, and that can hit you like a rock because now you're back down 10-1 because of your gears and the natural reality of not having so much momentum and a nice little flywheel spinning and everything like that. So somewhere in there, maybe I got your question. All right, Namrita, you ready for the next one? Greg asks, does chasing a higher FTP in this week's test increase the chance of accumulating fatigue as that bakes in the following week?
Yeah, that's always going to happen if you have a big increase in your FTP, because we get right into workouts the following week. But I would say don't sell yourself short. Get a good quality test in. If that means you gained 10 watts on your FTP or more, great. What we will suggest in that week afterwards, as you get readjusted to your new FTP, is using bias if needed, riding an incline. And we'll talk you through that. And so, the group workouts and in the workout previews. But you don't have to always ride to that target. So, I would suggest as you calibrate to your new threshold power that you kind of use feel and be a little bit conservative in that first week. But yeah, go have a good test. And if you increase, then great.
Yeah, excellent answer. And that's exactly why we make everybody aware that you have to bake it in that first week. We want you to have that. We are expecting it. And it's kind of thought about in our system, and it's the skills we're teaching. Tina, you up for tackling one? I might have to split this one with you. The question here is, Andrew asks, I see in this cycle, we have a workout called MAP, which is max aerobic power, MAP attack. Are we supposed to chase watts on the 30-second zone 6 surge and then control on recovery, or control on both surge and FTP segments? That's a complex question considering I wrote the workout.
I was gonna say, I think you should
defer. I'm sorry, I didn't realize quite where it was going.
I can say some things, but it's gonna be best from you.
It's hard to answer that question. It goes back into the discussion and the workshop we did talking about this individualization. The shorter ones, the individualization is hard. That being said, here's my answer. It should be hard. Like, you should be going as hard as you can and finish the interval. That's the best answer. Like do it in incline mode and go as hard as you can, or sim mode if you're not doing it in the group, right? And do it as hard as you can and finish the workouts. That might mean you're 30 watts less than the target. It might mean you're 40 watts more, but that's the nature of individualization. That's hard. Now, there's a good workout preview. We'll give guidance as always going into that workout and give you that same feedback when we get there. So I wouldn't overthink it. Just go hard when it says go hard, go a little less hard when it says go less hard, recover when it says recover, and don't pass out. Otherwise than that, those are only the things that will guide you. We're going to go hard. All right, Namrita, I'm going to ask you this one, but Tina, I'll come back to you, but this one just happens to be in Namrita's wheelhouse. I would love to get some guidance on losing some weight, how losing some weight fits into the training fueling structure of Basecamp.
Yeah, so the biggest, I will say there's three common reasons when people start to focus on their fueling, which when I say fueling, I'm specifically referring to eating or drinking more carbohydrates around and during your workouts to support the demands of the training. So it's not every ride. It's typically your Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday ride for the most part, where we would want to think about supporting the higher intensity work and all the adaptations like increased glycogen storage and all that with the higher carbs. So there's three big mistakes I see that are really common. I'm not saying that any of these are what you're doing, but just for everyone's benefit. One is people are afraid to take in the carbohydrates, so they're under fueling around the workouts. They're either going in fasted or they don't want it. They're like, it's only an hour and a half. I'm not going to eat during it. And so you're either doing water or just an electrolyte drink. But what happens then is it kind of messes up the hormonal environment in your body. So chances are, if you're not losing weight and you're not taking in any calories around your rides, you should be in a big calorie deficit there, right? But one, you're going to compromise your training and adaptation, but also if you're not losing weight, you're eating more calories somewhere later down the road. So my suggestion is to focus on the fueling and not under fueling, and then hopefully the rest of your day sorts itself out from an energy intake standpoint. The other one is eating more fat calories. So if you have come into the program and if you've been focusing on hitting my carb targets, but you haven't decreased your fat intake, you might be either not losing weight or you might be gaining weight. So you do have to compromise. So if protein is relatively consistent, which is fine, when your carb intake increases, go ahead and decrease your relative fat calorie contribution. And the other thing is track. So if you don't have an idea of how much you're taking in, if you have filled out and gotten the nutrition targets and training peaks, see, just objectively track your intake a few days to see. You might be eating more overall calories or more fat than you think you are. Again, I'm not saying that you are, but it's always good to have another objective look. So many people think they know what they're doing, and then they go through the, painful process of tracking for a few days, and that's pretty eye-opening, to be honest.
It's very eye-opening.
I guess I have one more thing to add to that. And do you mind if I say it? Just because I think it's such a common.
No, of course not.
When you're fueling your workouts, a lot of you like to eat real food, but pay attention to what you're taking in. So like the benefit of using sports nutrition products like sports drinks and gels and gummies is it's basically just carbs. If you're starting to eat real food like bars and baked goods and packaged foods, pay attention to all the extra fat calories that are in there. So you might only be looking at the grams of carbs, but you might be getting an extra 80 calories per snack from fat. That's all going to contribute to your bottom line at the end of the day.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Okay. Kathy, somebody's Hey, Peter, just email us that question at info@joinbasecamp.com. He's just having a problem making the form work, clicking on schedule now. Excellent answer. For workouts, well, I'll answer Brian's question, but for workouts, don't forget, everybody, we do a preview for every workout. But Brian says, similar question about the week's Thursday's workout, which I've renamed SS with upper zone 4 surges. You have 97 to 107% for 30 seconds, but the instructions are surge. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I understand the difference in the naming. It just means surge means if you're going one pace, you go a little harder and then you drop back down to that pace. That's the best answer I can give you. Yeah, it's a surge. If you want to say zone 4 surge, great. It works great for me and helps you position it in your head. That's awesome.
I would just add to that, that is not necessarily a place where you want to go super hard, all out hard. It's
Yeah.
just a surge, right? Like we are controlling
Mhm.
in those surges so that you can complete the entire workout. It does not need to be your max hardest 30 seconds in that surge.
All right, so surge means a little harder to you. Good. I think naming it in a way that helps you remember it and focus on targeting it is an awesome thing. And I think it's great for people to customize things like that if it helps you get through the workout. Awesome stuff. All right, I'm going to answer one final question and wrap this up. Eloy asked a question earlier. He said, maybe out of scope. I'm concerned about what happens after base camp. Burnout post May and June, etc. And then somebody, I think it was you, Brian, who said, +1. I assume you're talking about that. Somebody, Joe Hamilton, asked that in the Facebook group. If you're talking about mental burnout because you've been doing X amount of weeks or months or time doing structured workout, that is a reality of something that we all will face, that you might face. I like the process of training. I like some structure. I like rolling in and just doing the work and knowing what I'm doing. But also part of that, I make sure my Wednesdays and Sundays and ride days and whatever days I'm not doing intervals, I'm not a big read my power meter person on those days. And I don't have a plan and I just ride my bike wherever it takes me, try to get in the time range. I'm good, right? So I'll balance it out. So if it's psychological burnout, there's ways to find, like taking time off structured training. That really is just what jazzes you and what you do. If you're talking the idea of physiological burnout, and I'm making that term up at the moment, I'm not even sure it's really a term, but you're just going to get to the point like, wow, I peaked too early and I did this and that other stuff that you're hearing. You got to be so careful about all the hype of this. Literally, it almost becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, like overtraining. You've heard overtraining all your life, right? All your cycling life. Particularly, it stopped maybe about 3 years ago, but it was everywhere. How many people do you know truly overtrained? Like, put their name in a chat. Like, if you really know somebody who truly overtrained, like to the point where they had to take 3, 4, 5 months off the bike because they just couldn't function. The reality is you don't know anyone. I got news for you. You might know somebody who got sick, or you might know somebody who got stagnant, but you don't know but yet it took reams and articles and pages and concern and fear. Same thing. And all it was people were training wrong. Too much uptake of intensity, too much ramp rate. They were doing things they weren't ready to do. They were taking on training loads that their body wasn't prepared for. So when we think about burnout, if we're talking about the physiological sense, most people, when you see that, are being coached in a way, or they're the coach and explaining it in the way that they don't take proper rest breaks in a season. There's the magic answer right there. Mark Seipel, you get credit points for sticking it in chat. You have to learn. You can't just keep growing. It's not a linear thing forever. And you just keep building and building and building. You have to build a chronic load, rest a little. Build a chronic load, rest a little. Right? And that's when you think, and that's why it's so important. Like we were talking about, we did the plan overview in the first cycle. You got to think big picture. Every athlete in this session and who's going to watch this recorded session should be running at least a 2 peak season. If you're not going to the Olympics, and if you're not only doing the Tour de France, and you're not going to win a world championship, a single peak season makes sense for no one here. You should run 2, maybe even 3. Train it up, rest a little, revitalize, reset, train it, revitalize, reset. That's probably the normal practice that most of us should go through. You got to have that rest break in there to recharge. If you're worried about that type of burnout, you really should be thinking about where that fits in your summer schedule, your early summer, your late. I wouldn't even wait till late summer. I would say late spring, early summer, midsummer, maybe. You take that break, fit it in the right time of events, anywhere from 5 to 10 days off the bike, reset, a little bit of aerobic training when you come back, and you'll be right back at it. So I wanted to tackle that because that's the third concern I've heard about it. It's always should be a concern, but that's the answer. So just wanted to shoot it as a question. All right. And honestly, in final closing, join this Basecamp University Live. I will tell you, last year was the first year we did this with My VeloFit. I think they're the best AI out there for what they do. Incredible program. So you do your video, you look at your fit, you get your numbers. There was easily, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people in last year's course that were out of bounds enough that they were just doing harm to themselves. Even if you just use the free trial, that's why I asked them for it. Even if you just use even though you don't come to the course, use the free trial, measure yourself, right? Because the first role of biomechanics is to make sure you're not producing overuse long-term injuries, right? That's what you should be concerned about. 2, then we can teach you to make a couple more watts through optimization. 3, we can actually maybe help your aerodynamics. But those first 2 are the really key drivers. So even if you can't come to the class or you can't watch it recorded, use the free trial. You're going to get it tomorrow. It's 2 weeks. It's fully functional. You can run the whole program. You can do 10 videos in 2 weeks. That's the beauty of My VeloFit. You can keep doing them. Find out your numbers. And if you're off, definitively come to the class or watch the recording. So I'm only pitching it because I was surprised. I was going to say shocked. How many people were so far off? You were in an unhealthy spot riding your bike. And over time, it's going to result in an injury later in life when you really don't want one. So at least do the fitting. Okay, we're done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Tina, Namrita, Kathy, thank you again for another great cycle. Debbie never gets thanked. Just to say it, Debbie's such a great resource in the background. She was actually helping us with a little something going on here while we were in the meeting. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Great questions tonight. We appreciate the participation. Come to get engaged. Exciting 8 weeks ahead of us. We can't wait. Good night, everyone.
Bye.